or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jackie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, March 29th issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A history of disastrous CIA covert ops began with a 1953 coup in Iran by Mark Summer, a special to the news. Commentators on the origin of the Iran War often start their narrative in November 1979, when Iranian revolutionaries and Islamic fundamentalists seized the U.S. Embassy and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. That event contributed to the frosty relations between the United States and Iran that have lasted to the present day. It's a timeline that doesn't tell the whole story. A full understanding of the hostilities requires turning the clock back to August 1953. That was when the Central Intelligence Agency orchestrated a coup d'etat to overthrow Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mosaddegh, with the help of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, commonly known as MI6. Mosaddegh, a popular leader, had nationalized Iran's oil industry, so the wealth generated could, for the first time, be used for the benefit of Iran. That much progress proved a bridge too far for the U.S., Britain, and oil companies in both countries. The political upheavals that have marked U.S.-Iran relations for the past half-century can, in part, be traced back to the events of August 19, 1953. That statement comes from Jamil Hislani, author of the forthcoming book The Iranian Oil Crisis and Mosaddegh in the Cold War, 1949 to 1953. Hislani's book makes use of newly available materials from Turkey, the Soviet Communist Party, and others. According to Hassanli, if there was no coup in 1953, there may not be an Islamic revolution in 1979. The CIA's interactions have long been explained through the lens of the Cold War, but the Soviet Union was not interested in intervening in Iran and considered Mosaddegh to be a U.S. agent, said Hassanli, who responded to questions by email from his home in Baku, Azerbaijan. Prime Minister Mosaddegh placed great trust and confidence in the United States, Hassanli said. This faith stemmed from his belief in democracy and universal human values. In a cruel irony, Mosaddegh, a national hero to Iranians, was tried and convicted of treason after the coup. He was sentenced to 3 years of solitary confinement and spent the last 11 years of his life living under house arrest. In Mossadegh's place, the U.S. imposed an authoritarian monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. Major General Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., father of the man who would guide coalition troops in a war against Iraq in 1991, trained what would become the feared Savak secret police, who used torture and murder to crush dissent. The Shah's brutal reign lasted a quarter century, and Iranians never forgot who put him there. It's easy to see now why many Iranians continue to resent this intervention by America in their internal affairs, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright acknowledged when mentioning the coup in a speech in the American-Iranian Council in 2000. While the CIA's role was long known, the agency did not officially acknowledge it until 2013, on the coup's 60th anniversary. Thousands of declassified documents and records, including diplomatic cables, were released, with other government agencies declassifying files in 2017 and 2018. The movement to nationalize Iran's oil industry began when Mossadegh, in 1951, asked for an audit of the British-held Anglo-Iranian Oil Company to ensure the country was receiving the royalties it contracted for. When the company balked, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the oil industry. In response, Britain initiated a worldwide boycott of Iranian oil, including a blockage of Iranian seaports that crippled Iran's economy and caused the country to fall into bankruptcy. The CIA, in an operation headed by Kermit Roosevelt, a grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, and later a top executive at Gulf Oil, hired thugs to violently destabilize Mossadegh's rule by falsely stoking political and religious divisions. Iranian politicians, high-ranking army officials, and newspaper publishers were bribed. After the coup, the Shah ordered the execution of several dozen military officials and student leaders who were loyal to Mossadegh, and tortured to death nearly a dozen officers who were members of the communist Tudeh party. The U.S., for its role, made sure 40% of the oil profits would now be reaped by American firms. The covert action in Iran also stands out for another reason. It was the first of many covert foreign interventions the CIA would carry out for decades to come. As with the CIA's overthrow of Congo's Patrice Lumbama in 1961, and Chile's Salvador Allende in 1973, both of whom were killed, the intelligence agency's actions invariably subverted popular, democratically elected governments and movements seeking self-determination and freedom of expression in favor of right-wing authoritarian forces friendly to U.S. business interests. That was the case in 1954. 10 months after the Iran coup, when the CIA removed Guatemala's democratically elected president Jacobo Arbenez after he moved to disperse some of United Fruit Company's immense holdings of uncultivated land to poor farmers. The Eisenhower administration hired a top U.S. public relations firm to pump up fears of a communist takeover that would appear in the pages of major newspapers. The coup led to a succession of military dictators who for decades used murder and torture to ruthlessly squash dissent. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and his brother, CIA Director Allen Dulles, who had both urged President Dwight D. Eisenhower to greenlight the coup, had been partners in United Fruit's law firm in Washington. Guatemala would be the staging ground for the CIA to launch the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, to overturn the popular Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. 2 years earlier, the revolution had toppled dictator Fulgencio Batista and put a stop to United Fruit's vast ownership of Cuban banana plantations and the mafia's control of luxury hotels and casinos. To cripple the Cuban economy, the U.S. instituted an embargo that has remained in place, made assassination attempts on Castro, and has continued actions aimed at destabilizing the country to the present day. President Trump has imposed an oil blockade around the island that is also blocking medical supplies and is threatening an imminent overthrow of a government that poses no threat to the U.S. Former CIA agent Philip Agee, author of the book Inside the Company, CIA Diary, quit in 1969 after watching how his actions invariably led to the strengthening of military or right-wing dictatorships at the expense of leftist movements gaining in popularity. Something Agee did as a covert agent in Uruguay contributed to his eventual departure. After giving the name of someone to the Uruguay police as a person to watch, he heard the man yelling in agony a short time later, being tortured in a nearby cell. To drown out the screams, a police official raised the volume of a soccer game report on the radio. Those regimes were supported by the CIA, and the human cost was immense. Torture, executions, death squads, Agee said of the Latin American countries where he was stationed. The lasting effect of the Iranian and other coups took over years was to create blowback, also the title of a book by the late historian Chalmers Johnson. Blowback refers to the unintended consequences of the U.S. government's actions overseas that are kept secret from the public. Being left unaware of how the intelligence community interferes in other countries robs citizens of the ability to understand why another country may be retaliating against the U.S., Johnson told Democracy Now! In 2007. It all began with Iran and the deposing of Mossadegh, Johnson said, our first clandestine operation and one of the most tragic that we ever did. Mark Summers is a former reporter for the Buffalo News. In everybody's column, Letters from Our Readers, Trump continues to alienate allies. The current war with Iran and the growing maelstrom of consequences from U.S. and Israeli actions brings to mind a biblical verse and lines from a 17th century sermon by English clergyman John Donne. The Bible verse, "You reap what you sow," Galatians 6:7, is coming to fruition in the form of higher fuel prices, economic uncertainty, no clear end to the current confrontation, and a lack of support by most of our oldest and trusted allies. President Trump's recent statement, "My attitude is we don't need anybody, we're the strongest nation in the world," is a clear connection to the words of Donne. This alienation of most of our allies and the consequences of that isolation bring to mind Donne's first lines of his sermon, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." If one substitutes the word country for man, a comparison to our nation's current predicament is easily drawn. Trump and the U.S. military, after basically going it alone, now require help from the very countries he belittles and threatens. Is it any surprise that few of the world's leaders, including NATO members, have answered his calls for assistance? The outcome of the current situation is still unknown, but our country is reaping what our leaders have sown, making the last lines of Donne's sermon all the more chilling. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Brian Burke in Kenmore. EV owners don't fret over gas prices. In response to the letter published March 13th criticizing electric vehicles, in my 9th year driving electric vehicles, I can't emphasize enough how much I enjoy them. I charge up at home during the evening hours 2 to 4 times each week, depending on the season. My lungs appreciate the absence of toxic gasoline vapors during refill. The cost of fuel hasn't changed a bit in the past 4 weeks. My rooftop solar panels supply necessary fuel in the summer. My brake pads remain unused because of regenerative braking. There is no complex transmission to rebuild, and there is no exhaust pipe to replace. The electric motor has few moving parts and is silent when working. Simplicity is heaven. 8 years ago, I journeyed in my first EV from Buffalo to Jacksonville, Florida, without a problem. By then, sufficient Electrify America charging stations had come online along Interstate 95 to allow the trip. Today, there are 14,654 charging stations across the U.S. New York State has 666 stations built by 60 different companies. You can keep up with the rapidly growing EV charging infrastructure here, dcfctracker.com. In the face of the current situation in the Middle East, it's extremely puzzling that Governor Kathy Hochul is considering scaling back the climate goals enacted in 2019 by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Instead, she should greatly accelerate and build out of solar PV to protect state residents. Charlie Bowman in Gettsville. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The state should stay the course with solar. New York must strengthen its clean energy and economy and expand access to affordable, renewable power. Therefore, I urge care and clarity as Albany debates the state's long-term climate and energy framework. New York's success has come from a balanced approach, advancing affordability, reliability, and clean energy together, and that principle should guide today's discussions. I'm concerned about emerging conversations that appear poised to weaken core climate and clean energy commitments. Such signals have already created uncertainty among stakeholders, including the state's more than 18,000 solar workers. New York should reinforce, not risk, the programs that are delivering results. Distributed solar refers to solar power generation systems that are decentralized and located close to where the energy is used. It's one of the most effective tools to lower electricity bills, strengthen grid reliability, and give consumers real control over their energy use. The Accelerate Solar for Affordable Power, ASAP Act, builds on this by scaling rooftop and community solar and aligning with the state's energy plan. A January analysis by Synapse Energy Economics found that deploying 20 gigawatts of distributed solar and meeting energy storage goals would save residents $1 billion annually through lower wholesale electricity prices. Beyond affordability, renewable energy relies on resources no foreign conflict can disrupt, especially for households and small businesses facing high utility bills. Solutions are already available. I urge inclusion of the ASAP Act in the final fiscal year 2027 budget to protect consumers, strengthen local resilience, and secure long-term economic opportunity. By embracing proven strategies, we can ensure a more reliable, affordable, and self-reliant energy future. Andrew Hartley, East Aurora. Local data center would be a disaster. I'm writing to help make the public in Western New York aware of the proposed data center at the Stamp site in Genesee County. The developers are asking for $1.46 billion of your taxpayer dollars to build a complex the size of 38-plus football fields right next to the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge and other protected lands. This project will use 500 megawatts of electricity per year, enough to power 410,000 homes. It will use 20,000 gallons of water per day, which will have to be discharged somewhere. We will see higher electric bills, polluted waterways, and degradation of areas set aside for us to preserve and enjoy our regional wildlife. The project will also encroach on the sacred lands of the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. The Genesee County Economic Development Corp. was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement with the company proposing to build this structure, so technically we don't even know who we're dealing with. Why would the GCEDC even be considering this option? because it stands to benefit to the tune of a minimum of $145.9 million in fees from the deal. Please make your voice heard with your representative. Say no to the data center. Everyone in Western New York, indeed in New York State, will be negatively impacted by this expenditure should it be granted. Reverend Canon Barbara J. Price, Warsaw. U.S. imperialism is not welcome. Donald Trump's reckless, ungoverned waging of war is shocking, dangerous, and toxic to America. Congress must stop this madness. Some presidents, Carter, Teddy Roosevelt, Wilson, Jefferson, Grant, others, have written history books. All evidence indicates Trump has never once read one. How else to explain his appalling reintroduction to the world stage of American imperialism? CIA-backed coup d'etat? Installing our puppets? What could go wrong? Now is an apt moment to consider how many of those CIA coups really helped us in the long run. Iran? The Shah is why they hate us still. Iraq? We backed Saddam Hussein until we invaded. Are we loved now? We are not. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Haiti, Guatemala, Chile, Syria, Egypt. Where have our numerous clandestine regime changes changed their hearts toward us? How safe is Central America now that United Fruit got their profits and we were able to thwart their land reforms 75 years ago? That really worked out for us in the long run, right? Did I hear our military is now actively operating in Mexico and Ecuador? And Cuba is threatened and under siege. America is blockading humanitarian aid to Cuba this moment. Let that sink in. Where decent Americans fought for freedom, a liberated Western Europe loved us. But where we play emperor, people hate us. It's a very old story. Britain couldn't afford its empire. No one ever can. But you'd have to read. Robert Biniszewicz, Buffalo. It's time to close the rural health reality gap. By Swagata Banik. 1 year ago, I moved to Western New York to become Dean of the DePiro School of Health Professions at St. Bonaventure University. I left Cleveland, one of the country's most sophisticated healthcare environments, drawn not by scale, but by purpose. I came because I believe rural health is where healthcare equity will ultimately be decided. I came with assumptions. In one of the wealthiest states in America, I expected that while rural healthcare challenges existed, the infrastructure supporting access would be stable. What I discovered instead was a tale of two New Yorks. 6 hours from Manhattan, Western New York faces a healthcare gap measured more in decades than miles. Rural counties have roughly half the primary care providers per capita, but the challenge extends beyond workforce alone. As a public health researcher and implementation scientist, I evaluate systems not by what they promise, but by what they produce. What I see in rural healthcare is not simply a shortage problem, it is a design problem. Rural health access begins with provider availability, but true access depends on whether care is holistic, coordinated, and reachable. Transportation barriers, workforce shortages, aging populations, and economic pressures often determine whether patients can continue care. County health needs assessments reflect what I call the rural health reality gap, the distance between healthcare availability and healthcare usability. At the same time, healthcare innovation funding remains heavily concentrated in large metropolitan research institutions. These centers drive discovery, but discovery alone does not improve health without implementation. Too often, innovations developed in urban settings are expected to work in rural communities without adaptation, creating a discovery-delivery imbalance, where ideas are funded, but the systems needed to implement them locally are not. Rural health transformation requires investment in delivery. Health professions schools and regional universities are central to this work. Their teaching mission is not a limitation. It is a strategic advantage. They train the workforce, maintain partnerships, and support the clinical infrastructure rural healthcare depends on. The regional universities must both be supported and step up. With the right focus, they can become innovation and translation hubs where new care models are tested and adapted for real-world rural settings. Breakthroughs improve health only when they are implemented. And implementation happens where patients live, not where grants are awarded. At St. Bonaventure University, we're trying to build exactly this kind of collaborative rural health innovation model, because universities in rural regions must become part of the solution, not observers of the problem. Workforce development may be the most important rural health investment we can make. Students who train locally are far more likely to stay. Expanding rural training pathways, local recruitment, and academic health partnerships may improve access more than any single technology. Investment is needed in practical care models, mobile clinics, community health workers, and home-based care, which in rural communities are not innovations, but necessities. Closure of rural hospitals such as Bradford Regional Medical Center remind us that healthcare facilities are more than providers. They are economic anchors and community infrastructure. When rural healthcare weakens, communities weaken. Rural health requires a new compact built on shared responsibility. Universities must build workforce and innovation pipelines. Healthcare systems must collaborate to sustain access. Policymaking must align funding with community realities. Rural health is not just a healthcare issue. It is a workforce, economic, and equity issue, ultimately a question of whether opportunities should depend on zip code. Rural communities should not be the last mile of healthcare innovation, but the proving ground for how healthcare works when it is designed around people, not just systems. Swagata Banik, Ph.D., is Dean and Professor of DePiro School of Health Professions at St. Bonaventure University. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. In my view, letter writing still carries real value. By Robert Potzek. Does anyone write letters anymore? I do. Let me tell you about it. First, I need to go back in time to when I was very young at summer camp. I know I wrote at least one letter home, and it was probably very simple. It was the very first letter I wrote. I know it's hard to imagine in this era of no-cost phone calls, texting, Zoom, and FaceTime. But when I was in college, I wrote letters home and welcomed letters to learn what was going on back at home. My first serious letter writing came when I spent a year halfway around the world in India on a Fulbright fellowship. It took 7 to 10 days for a letter to get from India to the U.S., and another 7 to 10 days for a return letter. It was exciting to be in such a different and exotic culture, and I shared my experiences and impressions with my mother and my good friend Ellen. Those letters had a great impact afterward. Over the course of the year, Ellen and I fell in love through the letters, and when I returned, we got married and are happily married to this day. I described that letter writing in a My View column that appeared in the news one Valentine's Day. That's in the past, but my letter writing is alive and well today. It consists of letters back and forth with my good friend Stan, who lives on Long Island and was my boss for 10 years. We became fast friends when we worked together, but lost touch for nearly 15 years after I retired. Then, in December of 2024, on impulse, I sent a Hanukkah greeting via email to Stan and his family. I received a 2-page response in which he shared deeply about the difficulties he had experienced retiring from his work as owner and manager of the small company I had worked for. He had lost his sense of purpose. In that letter, he shared a poem he had written titled "The Stranger." It begins, "I used to watch a man go by, gray and bent with cane." It ends, "Now after many years, I know that I've become that guy." His openness moved me, and we've been writing letters back and forth for more than a year now. The letters are typed, usually 2 pages in length, and are sent as email attachments. I print and keep the letters in a file folder that is about 3 inches thick and growing. We each usually write 2 letters a week. They are about anything and everything, a sort of rolling long-distance conversation. Sometimes we share things that happened in our pasts, and other times things that are occurring in the present. I might tell him about driving my grandson to school and about me ringing bells in my church. He might tell me about his granddaughter playing the piccolo in concerts and about his writing a princess story for a younger granddaughter. We share the books we are reading, sometimes reading the same book. It is always exciting to check my email and find a letter from Stan waiting there for me. The letters led to Stan going with me on a trip to our special fishing camp in Canada, and to me traveling to Long Island to go with him to the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. My dear friend Stan and I have enriched each other's lives through our letters, which stand as evidence that the art of letter writing is not lost. Why not give it a try yourself? A better direction. Ryan's bid to lead Scajaquada project and demolition pause are smart moves. Once the uproar over budgeting and taxing dies down, Major Sean Ryan's most significant policy initiatives, other than somehow dragging the city into solvency, should come into better focus. 2 of them represent significant shifts in direction from the previous Brown policies. They're important changes and should lead to stronger neighborhoods on both sides of Main Street. First, Ryan wants to reinvigorate transformation plans for the Scajaquada Expressway, Route 198, which had not been a focus for Brown's team. And second, Ryan wants to slow the pace of demolitions, which, unfortunately, were a big priority during the Brown years. A Scajaquada that makes sense. Good work was done on a possible transformation of the Scajaquada between 2020 and 2023 after Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council took over the project from New York's Department of Transportation. Something needed to happen. The highway had long mutilated a beautiful Olmsted Park for little reason. Studies found that only 20% of users get on at one end and get off at another, and only 18% use the expressway to get to work, with only 8% of that number using the full expressway going east to west. And then there was the tragic death of 3-year-old Maxim Sugrovisky in 2015, who was hit by a car while walking in the park. It was time to downgrade for the benefit of Delaware Park, its surrounding neighborhoods, pedestrians, and bicyclists. In the end, 4 options evolved, with the 2-lane parkway announced in January of 2023. In March of 2024, Governor Kathy Hochul instructed the state DOT to analyze the transportation project. That's where momentum seems to have bogged down. Last fall, the DOT shelved the project by reclassifying it to a category called illustrative. Ryan has long been supportive of a Skagway change, and as reported in the news, Justin Sondel recently sent a letter to DOT Commissioner Marie-Therese Dominguez requesting that the city be granted lead agency status on the project, and that $56 million for the project be included in the DOT's Transportation Improvement Plan, which would push the project into the next construction season. Let's hope the agency is agreeable. Tearing down Buffalo isn't working. While demolitions of truly irredeemable structures are necessary, it's important to give buildings a chance for rehabilitation. That has really happened in Buffalo, and the blighted streetscapes that have resulted are most evident on the city's east side, where grassed-over vacant lots appear on block after block. Some streets have the look of desolate urban prairies, with 1 or 2 lonely houses left standing in the middle. As reported by Sondel, Ryan said the city has demolished more than 300 homes over the last 5 years, at a cost to taxpayers of more than $10 million. Property owners are supposed to pay, but usually don't. It's not just the last 5 years. Earlier in Brown's administration, thousands of homes were demolished. It may have seemed the right thing to do at the time. Indeed, Brown's 2024 resignation announcement boasts of the demolition of over 8,000 abandoned and blighted properties. But given the city's current crisis-level housing shortage, the rearview mirror sheds a less flattering spotlight. Ryan has imposed a 60-day moratorium on demolitions. Another 100 structures had been slated to come down when the announcement was made, and intends to make sure that other options wouldn't be wiser before razzing the building. As the mayor stated, the city will be more intentional, making sure that the demolition is a last resort and not the reflex option. This is good news for more intact, or at least less forlorn, streetscapes throughout Buffalo. But the mayor's announcement sends another signal. It will lead many to hope that the next time a great northern preservation battle comes along, the city will be on the side of resilience and history. Negligent owners, take note. In another voice, housing, Hochul's seeker reforms are urgently needed, by Melissa Brinson and Mark D. Jackson. Introduced in the 2026-27 executive budget proposal, Governor Kathy Hochul's Let Them Build agenda will encourage and spur much-needed commercial development across New York State, especially critically needed new housing, and it deserves widespread support. Among the tenets of the agenda are proposed reforms to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, the long-established law requiring various government agencies to assess the environmental impacts of projects before approving them. SEEKR applies to almost every development project in the state, including housing, infrastructure, and other commercial projects. According to the New York City Citizens Budget Commission, a nonpartisan, nonprofit civic think tank, for every year that a project is delayed under the environmental review process, a 5% cost increase is added. Too many projects have died on the proverbial vine as a result of unnecessary and illogical red tape. In fact, the governor's office estimates that the approval process can take up to 2.5 years before a project receives final approval. Hochul's proposal does not claw back regulations. Projects will still need to comply with local zoning, water and sewer regulations, air quality permitting, and other safeguards. These reforms will be equally important for infrastructure projects. Infrastructure readiness will keep New York State competitive and eliminate the threat of losing projects to surrounding states. SEQA reforms will have a positive ripple effect in other sectors. Working in tandem with Hochul's universal child care agenda, SEQA revisions will include the accelerated development of child care facilities, helping the state reach its goal of implementing universal child care. New home construction and development projects will create more jobs in the construction and skilled trade sectors. Putting more residents in stable, reliable residential units will help alleviate the workforce shortage across all sectors of the economy. We applaud the governor's ambition to reestablish New York as a business-friendly state where individuals, families, and businesses can affordably live. Melissa Brinson is president of the Upstate Chapter, and Mark D. Jackson is Government Affairs co-chair of the New York City Metro Chapter of the National Commercial Real Estate Development Association. We need tax reform that closes loopholes benefiting the super rich, by Frama Haroop. The rich should pay their fair share of taxes. Who can argue with that? But then we must decide who is rich and what is meant by fair. Neither political party has distinguished itself in making such distinctions. But Republicans play an especially outrageous game in portraying the Internal Revenue Service as the working stiff's enemy. For salaried workers, taxes come straight out of paychecks. Owners of small businesses have more deductions at their disposal, but the neighborhood bakery that tries to follow the rules doesn't have much to fear. When Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act funded the hiring of about 15,000 IRS employees, however, Republicans played the public for boobs. Are they, the IRS, going to have a strike force that goes in with AK-15s already loaded, ready to shoot some small business person in Iowa? Senator Chuck Grassley, the Iowa Republican, asked on Fox News. In reality, criminal investigation special agents go only after serious tax cheats, and just 2,000 of them are armed. These cases involve destroying records, double bookkeeping, and the like. The agents aren't persecuting taxpayers whose math was innocently off or were even negligent. And so, to address Grassley's complaint, if some small business person in Iowa is engaged in money laundering, narcotics trafficking, or major league fraud, then yes, armed IRS agents may come to visit. The IRS employed about 102,000 people at the beginning of Donald Trump's second term. Staffing has been cut to about 74,000. Not only are there fewer agents going after tax dodgers, but there are also fewer customer support workers able to answer ordinary people's tax questions. The chief beneficiaries of lax tax enforcement are the rich, who employ squads of accountants to hide income or manufacture unlawful deductions. The tax code already favors them. For example, capital gains taxes, which are paid after selling stock or other assets, pay taxes at a lower rate than wages. That's why Meta magnate Mark Zuckerberg is paid a salary of only $1 a year. He's lavishly compensated through a cargo ship-sized pile of securities and other assets taxed at the lower capital gains rate. There are reasons for treating capital gains differently from earned income, But must the tax advantage for the former be so big? Democrats, crusading for more tax fairness, have this foolish habit of targeting their own rich residents. The proposal in Democratic-controlled California to slap a one-time 5% tax on everything a billionaire owns is nuts. Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom wisely opposes this utterly complicated scheme, which it seems would force some Californians to add up the value of their vintage watches, boats, and paintings for tax purposes. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, meanwhile, weaves myriad proposals for raising taxes in ways that would seep deep into the middle class. What the California and New York tax proposals have in common is providing an incentive for the rich to move elsewhere. Many very rich people have continued to live in these jurisdictions for their economic vitality, schools, cultural institutions, and other amenities, and they pay almost all of the income tax. But they have limits. It's one thing to tax them. It's another to portray taxing them as means of punishment. Tax reform that closes loopholes and special deals benefiting the super rich must be done at the national level. The IRS doesn't make tax laws. It is a federal agency that collects taxes and enforces the laws. Middle income and merely affluent Americans should recognize this. The taxes that the richest among us don't pay are the taxes that they pay. This is from the Creators Syndicate. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Sexual assault thrives when survivors keep quiet about the abuse. Dolores Huerta broke her silence 60 years after Cesar Chavez assaulted her. In her statement, Huerta said, "I carried this secret for as long as I did because building the movement and securing farm worker rights was my life's work. She did not want to hurt the movement." After 15 years of working with survivors and supporting domestic violence and sexual assault programs, I know this instinct well. Most survivors do not want to rock the boat or damage the reputation of leaders, bosses, or ex-partners. Speaking up can mean destabilizing families, workplaces, and entire communities. Survivors will deny their own pain to protect institutions and the people they care about, especially in oppressed and marginalized communities. Latinos in the U.S. are already stereotyped as criminals and rapists. No one wants to contribute to this narrative. No one wants this to be true of their heroes, sons, friends, and neighbors. There's too much at stake. Closer to home, here in San Francisco, John Jacobo, a community leader, was accused of having assaulted several women. In many ways, I see parallels in which accusations against a charismatic leader divide a community between those who think there's no way he could do that and those who believe the survivor. Often the community has more concern for the person being accused of the assault and ruining their lives versus the concern for the victim and how their lives are never the same after the assault. And yet there is hope. I am relieved that the United Farm Workers, UFW, and the Chavez family are not denying these allegations and standing on their values, and that many in the Latino community are siding with survivors even when it means re-examining their views of revered figures. That shift matters. Standing up and telling your story is the bravest thing a survivor can do. There is always the fear of not being believed. Professionally, I supported dozens of women who were assaulted while working in the fields by employers, by co-workers, and by family members. Most of the women I worked with were undocumented, and their immigration status was used to coerce their silence. There were also bystanders who knew of the abuse but chose to do nothing out of fear of retaliation. As I read the stories of Anna Murgia and Deborah Rojas, recalling how they were groomed and abused by Cesar Chavez, I could not help but wonder what would have happened if they had come forward as teens. Would they have been believed? Abuse is made possible in silence. Abuse is reinforced when abusers are protected by religion, culture, and status. Society is complicit and creates environments where abuse is enabled. Personally, I grew up in a Christian community and was taught to not bear false witness and to not cause men to stumble. I was also taught that sex before marriage was a sin. So when I was in middle school and one of my friends was gang raped, members of the church questioned why she had those friends in the first place. She was judged instead of protected. As an adult, these experiences stayed with me. When I experienced abuse firsthand, I didn't confide in anyone in my Christian community, because how do you talk about assault when you're not supposed to be having sex in the first place? No matter how long Herta lived with this secret, she was brave enough to tell her story. It's because of her and others that more of us will come forward, regardless of who, when, where, and what the circumstances of the assault were. Because at the end of the day, what is a justice movement without justice for women? This is by Elizabeth Avalos from The Fulcrum. In Buffalo Next, the spotlight on economy. Income varies widely across Buffalo, Niagara, by David Robinson. There's a wide disparity in incomes across Erie County. Clarence, the community with the highest median household income in Erie County, has more than double the spending power of the typical household in Buffalo, the community with the lowest, according to the latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau. 4 communities in Erie County, Clarence, Elma, Grand Island, and Orchard Park, have median household incomes that top $100,000. But 2 communities, Buffalo and Lackawanna, have incomes below $50,000 per household, which illustrates the wide disparity in incomes between Erie County's toniest suburbs and 2 of its biggest cities. Income levels are an important economic factor because how much a family earns determines how much they can spend. And the more a household can spend, the more attractive they are to stores and other businesses that seek to turn those families into customers. Population plays a factor in that calculation as well. Sparsely populated communities with high incomes like Elma are less likely to attract big box stores and other businesses that rely on high volume. But suburbs like Amherst, which have high incomes but not the highest, as well as the population that comes from being the biggest Buffalo suburb, have the magic combination of people and spending power, which explains why so much of the region's housing and retail development takes place there. There's a chart with incomes in the Buffalo-Niagara region. It is the median household incomes are highest in Clarence and lowest in Buffalo. If we start at the top, number 1, Clarence, $121,450,000. Elma, $108,281,000. Grand Island, $107,036,000. Orchard Park, $105,462,000. Aurora's $97,763,000. Colden is $95,781,000. Amherst, $93,000. Marilla, $90,000. Boston, 90,000, Eden, 89,000, Alden, 88,000, Wales, 87,000, Lancaster, 86,000, Hamburg, 86,000, North Collins, 81,000, Sardinia, 80,000, the town of Tonawanda, 76,000, West Seneca, 75,000, Newstead, 71,000, Concord, 70,000, Evans, 70,000, Cheektowaga, 67,000, Holland, 67,000, the city of Tonawanda, 62,000, Collins, 58,000, Lackawanna, 48,000, and Buffalo, 48,000. In retail news, will Bob's open more furniture stores here? Bob's Discount Furniture is a bright spot among furniture retailers these days, as many others have struggled. Buffalo Niagara has just 2 stores, in Amherst and Orchard Park, but could we be getting more? The Connecticut-based furniture retailer, which just completed its initial public offering, is leaning into expansion. Last year, it opened 20 stores and entered 2 new markets, North Carolina and Vermont. That left the company with 209 locations. Now, Bob's has plans to more than double its brick-and-mortar holdings to 500 by the year 2035. Furniture stores have been operating amid a weak housing market, low consumer confidence, rising prices, and volatile tariffs. But Bob sees a reason to celebrate. The company saw its fourth quarter net revenue increase 8% year over year to $648.8 million. The revenue increase was driven by new store openings and comparable sales growth. Bob's said it attracts customers across all income levels, but saw a meaningful increase in new customers earning over $150,000, underscoring the broad appeal of its value proposition. The over $150,000 income demos have grown faster than the others, said CEO Bill Barton on a call with analysts. They're all grown this year, but the more affluent ones have grown faster. Their buying behavior shifted up from a focus on good to more of our better to mid-tier pricing, which is very encouraging. Bob's Discount Furniture entered the Buffalo Niagara market in 2024. The deeply discounted furniture retailer runs on an everyday low price concept and does not run sale events. In addition to its daily discounted furniture, Bob's is known for the cafe areas in the middle of its stores that offer free ice cream and cookies. Book Corner owner decides to keep beloved store open. Every year, Jeffrey Morrow makes a decision whether to take on one more year as owner of the Book Corner, a beloved, sprawling bookstore on Main Street in Niagara Falls. He had planned to retire at age 65, but that birthday has been in the rearview mirror for a few years now. So every year since then, he has decided whether to take his retirement or whether to keep his store open another 365 days. His most recent plan was to let the Book Corner see its 100th birthday in 2027, have an epic centennial birthday bash, then walk off into the sunset. Now, plans have changed, and much to the delight of many, the latest plan keeps the bookstore open. But if you're going to visit, you'd better call first. Now, I'm just going to get up and do things and leave the store anytime I want, Morrow said. Before, Morrow would take 1 week off every year in January to go surfing in the Bahamas for his birthday. Now he expects to take off about a month and a half in total, sporadically during the year, allowing him to live his life, but allowing book lovers to hang on to their reader's paradise. I think it's a win-win. I still love what I do, and people love the store, so that way we don't end it. But I want to be able to just do anything I want now, he said. That's great news for any of the book lovers in Western New York who, after nearly a century, are somehow still finding out the Book Corner exists. Opened in 1927, the same year as the famed Strand bookstore in New York City, the Book Corner has 3 floors of new and used books, as well as a growing collection of vinyl records. There's a performance space on the 2nd floor, complete with a grand piano, which Morrow lets groups use for free and which hosts local authors. There are vintage artwork, memorabilia, and other cool curiosities at every turn, as well as 2 resident cats to put the cherry on top of the eclectic.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,